For those of you who do not know me, I am Estela Ben-Simon. I am the chair of the campaign, and I'm really proud to welcome you today. When March 2020 came, we all thought, or at least I thought, oh, this is something temporary, and we will be back to normal in May. But here we are today, almost 2 years later, and many of us are still wearing masks. So the pandemic that started in March of 2020 came along with many other crises. We saw the brutal murder and vigilantes killing black people, black women. And, but with that crisis, what we also saw is that there is less timidity among people to speak about the disparities in wealth, in education, and in health that impact us. And out of this crisis, it is really amazing that we have had a seismic change in the leadership of the public California higher education system. It is amazing that we have, for the first time, 3 leaders, one black man, congratulations, Dr. Drake, a Latina, Dr. Daisy Gonzalez, and a Latino, Dr. Joe Castro. And if this were not only enough, we have even more. California is known for making change, and we also have, who would have thought that in our tripartite system, we have now 3 women leading the governance boards of our system. So congratulations, Dr. Pamela Hayes. Congratulations, Cecilia Estolano, and congratulations, Lillian Kimball. 3 women of color leading our system of higher education. And we at the campaign are here to support you and to work with you to make the system of higher education in California not only a place of opportunity and justice in theory, but also in results. Now, I wanted to also tell you that I came to California in 1995. I came from Manhattan, which I thought was the center of the world. And I thought, I'm only doing this temporarily. I'm only coming for like 2 or 3 years. And I also came at the time when California was making change, was leading change, but it was bad change. It was the movements against bilingual education. It was the movement against the undocumented, against immigration, and of course, against affirmative action. So I never thought that I would call myself a proud Californian, but 25 years have gone by, and I am a proud Californian. But most of all, I am really proud to be the chair of the campaign for college opportunity, which is led by 3 superwomen, Michelle, Audrey, and Jessie. And, in my scholarly work at the very beginning, one of my areas of study was leadership. And one of the biggest theories in leadership is about transformational leadership. And they always showed men. And it used to make me so angry. Well, these 3 women are transformational leaders. And they are transforming the lives of thousands of students. 2 great examples are, with their leadership, we got a new associate degree in transfer and the elimination of remedial education in community colleges. These 2 things were the biggest obstacles for opportunity and degree attainment, particularly for racially minoritized students. So, this is all to say that this is a wonderful day to celebrate the leadership of our 3 system leaders and our 3 governance systems. and to work together to bring actually to work together to hack the status quo. So thank you for joining us. And now I introduce to you our wonderful president of the campaign, Michelle Siqueiros.
I'm so excited and filled with gratitude. It has been a long year and a half since all of us went into shutdown and have been living the Zoom life. It is beautiful to see all three of you here together. It's beautiful to be surrounded by each of you. And I appreciate the hundreds of you who are tuning in to watch this live stream, where we're going to have an incredible conversation with UC President Michael Drake, with Acting Chancellor Daisy Gonzalez, and with Chancellor Joe Castro. The first time they've been able to be in person together, so that brings me a lot of joy, because we know that in order for California to be strong, they need to be able to work together in service of our students. I thought I would just share a few things, because I think it's so beautiful and amazing that we do have leaders of our public colleges and universities that reflect the diversity of our system. Two of you are first-generation college-going students. Daisy was a proud foster youth, and their experience is really brought to the table every single day, right, that you make decisions. They have really done so much to really focus and unabashedly be about equity and not be afraid to talk about race gaps and how they're going to close them. And we are so grateful for that. I thought I would start, because I feel so much gratitude at being here today, asking each one of you, we'll start with you, Daisy, tell us one thing you're especially grateful for amidst this incredibly challenging environment that you're leading in.
Thank you for starting so lightly. I think I'm personally grateful for family, and for someone like me, it's a very broad definition. So the family around me and my system, on this panel with me, and then of course my life partner Enrique, who's here with me, and then our incredible Board of Governors who are also here. Chancellor Castro?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me today. I'm excited to be here. This is very LA, by the way. I'm getting used to it. This isn't like Fresno. This is different. I love Fresno, by the way, and the Valley. I'm very thankful, like Daisy said, for my family and my health, and this incredible opportunity that Chair Kimball and the Board of Trustees gave me to serve California in a new and exciting way.
It's great again to see everyone. I mean, Joe, who I've known maybe 25 years, and but hadn't seen for years. Monica, who I worked with for so many years, and so many of you. It's really a great looking group, and so wonderful to be here. I'm actually grateful to be able to be here for this moment with all of you. Bob, good to see you there. So it's just really nice to see so many friends. And I would say that we all learned the thing that the virus and the pandemic took away from us. Some here have perhaps lost people or had family members who were very ill. For everyone, it really separated us from those people who make us strong, the people who are in our families, those who are the most important to us, and I think gave us a chance to really focus on what really matters, and that is really the people and the family, the people in your circle who hold you together. So I'm most grateful for that. And I will say I'm grateful for science and the opportunity that we have to move back into a world that we can truly appreciate.
Amen to that. We are grateful for science. So in March 2020, the COVID pandemic shut everything down, and quickly our college leaders pivoted to offer online instruction. Can you share, and I'll start with you, Chancellor Castro, what is the most challenging thing that you believe our students face?
Well, I think there are a number of challenges, but I would say the most significant one had to do with financial issues. So many of the students that we serve in the CSU were already on the edge, already dealing with huge food, housing insecurity, and the pandemic exacerbated it. I know many of my students at Fresno State lost their jobs immediately, and so that's been, of course, a huge issue, and the grants we provided and other support has been so important. And then I would say the isolation and the stress that I hear from them, the fact that they've been, and they haven't been able to see their friends and to really experience what they thought they were going to experience in their higher education sort of journey. So those are some of the things that I've heard from them.
I think for our students, a similar story, and you'll probably hear the same thing from UC. Certainly, basic needs were already a concern for our students system-wide. We already knew that more than 60% of our students faced food and housing insecurity, and that was one of the biggest challenges. I think the other really critical piece of it is mental health. But for many of our students, we have the most diverse student population in this state, in the country. They have been battling 3 different pandemics: COVID-19, systemic racism, and poverty. And that is probably at the nexus. All of it is financial aid. They can't wake up and focus on school if they are homeless and if they have to figure out where their next meal is.
We're speaking of the same circumstances. So the answers are similar to the things that faced our students. I was at the Ohio State University at the time that this began, and so our immediate response really was to look into reserves and other things to be able to support students as they move forward in a variety of ways. And actually we're grateful to be able to do that, but saw the immediate need right at the beginning. Something else that I experienced, 2 things I'd say that I experienced right during that spring. One is I was teaching undergraduate students, as I had been doing for 15 years, and I went from my in-person class with them on a weekly basis to being on Zoom, and I could feel how much they missed each other when they came together in the class right away. And so I really felt that separation, and that they really felt it acutely. So I saw that, and it was heartbreaking that we were not able to have graduation, which is something that the students, and particularly students who were first generation, and their families have been looking forward to for decades in many cases, where they would come together for this magnificent event to really herald in a new future for this loved one. And we had to say, no, we're not going to be able to do that the same. So we did it virtually, and people liked it a lot. We had 100,000 people in a virtual ceremony. It was really, really great. But the ability to come together and have those experiences is something that's hard to replicate, and looking forward to getting back there.
So, Chancellor Gonzalez, I want to start with you and ask you, given that the reality that COVID-19 has definitely affected everyone, and students of color in particularly even worse, what has been the community college response to really address those disparities?
There's been a lot of support. We're very proud of our 116 colleges, from federal emergency funding to state emergency funding, but they've gone above and beyond to try to meet a widening gap, right, that existed for decades. It had really deep roots, but certainly emergency grants, technology, hotspots, and I mention all of those things because it really is just the beginning of what it's going to take for our students to succeed. It is still not enough. The other big piece of it that we lost sight of as we were transitioning everything online is that learning curve, right? For many of our faculty and staff and the wraparound services, but for our students as well. And that was a challenging piece for community colleges. But one thing that we are very proud of is we never shut down. Our doors were always open. We may have had to redirect and rethink professional development to meet the moment in time, but we never shut down.
Chancellor Castro.
Overnight, we became the nation's largest online university, and that happened in the course of just a few days, and we were able to provide support to our faculty to teach in that venue, and support for our students, financial support. We advocated for federal funding, as Daisy said, emergency grants, very aggressive around technology, because we had to be. I mean, here we were basically saying to our students, you're going to need to connect with us virtually, and we know that there have been inequities there as well. And then we revamped a lot of our services so that they could be provided virtually. Those were all very significant actions, and we're still doing a lot of that. We're in a transition period, and we've been even more active with technology, launched a new partnership with Apple to try to make sure that every one of our students has that technology access.
It seems like it took a pandemic to confirm that everybody should have access to broadband, a laptop, and basic, computer, and in the digital age, right, of the 21st century.
Yes.
President Drake.
The change to virtual education that our students and faculty had to leap to immediately was something that was learned by doing. So we moved rapidly forward to that and appreciate that. Another aspect of this that we haven't touched on is a little over half of our budgetary, we divide ourselves by budget, but a big portion of our enterprise is in the health services. And so the first patients admitted to the hospital with COVID in California were at our hospital in San Francisco. We have had people doing the typing of the variants from the very beginning, working on how to take care of people in the ICUs and the emergency rooms, going from dozens to scores to hundreds of patients in our hospitals, moving to overflow. And I just want to say that throughout this whole period and into this very moment, as we have patients in our hundreds still in our hospital today, that our nurses and ward clerks and doctors and all of the people in our hospitals have been working through this pandemic under circumstances they never thought that they would face in their careers, and have done all they could to keep the toll as low as possible. But it's been really heroic effort that has continued. And I will finish by saying I was at UC Davis last week at the medical center, and throughout all of this now 18 months of day and night working with this pandemic, I was really pleased and proud to see that our staff, our health service workers, have their sleeves rolled up. We're proud of their efforts, and we're towing the line and doing what they can to take care of all of us. And so they have our great gratitude.
So it sounds like there's a few silver linings that you keep doing moving forward. I'd like to ask you about transfer. That's obviously, as you know, one of our core issues at the campaign. Community college students deserve the opportunity to be prepared for transfer. Unfortunately, according to PPIC, only 28% of students who enter a community college say they're going to transfer ever do after 6 years. We clearly could and should do better. It's why we've championed the associate degree for transfer and Assembly Bill 928. It's also an area where it's critically important that the three of you work together, right? So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about how you will work together moving forward to change that statistic so that we can finally fix transfer in California. Daisy, I'd like to start with you.
I know I'm new to the gang, to the panel, and I miss some of the chat features on Zoom right now. But here's what I'll say. I think I have been embraced by these incredible leaders around me and really thinking through how we can work together. A key part of it is the optimism of what potential legislation could bring to the conversation, staying focused on the broader transfer ecosystem. We do a lot of great work with UC and thinking about our UC Chancellor's Office task force, but there is always more that we can do. And what I mean by that is a joint research agenda, having not only data MOUs across segments, thinking collectively of how we implement the P16 pilot that was just in the state budget, and then collective advertisement to California. They are our students from the moment that they enter pre-K to the moment that they earn a doctorate degree, and that's what it's going to take for California to succeed.
Chancellor Castro.
Well, I think I want to begin by saying we genuinely like each other. We communicate regularly. We meet all the time. We're texting each other. And I want you to know that. And part of that is because we want to have a strong transfer pathway. It's so important. Over half of our students come from community colleges, and I'd like to see us increase the number of transfer students and do everything we can to build off of what happened earlier with the ADT. I mean, that led to an explosion of transfer students across the CSU, and there's more work to do, and we're ready to continue that work so that we can see that happen.
And I'll echo what my colleagues have said. Meeting Daisy more recently, but working with Eloy Ortiz-Oakley and with Joe, who I've known for decades on this, we believe we're all partners in this continuum. And there are things that, first, transfer is very important, and also helping grow the capacity of higher education across the segments in California is very important. So we're very interested in growing and diversifying the professoriate. We think that's important for us, it's important for the community colleges, it's important for the CSU. And so we honestly work together seamlessly as colleagues in this, and are looking forward to continuing those efforts. And and Joe and I text more often than I text with Daisy, but we'll get there. But we really do work together. I work honestly as closely with Joe as I do with our chancellors, just in the course of a week or a month, and so it's these things feel like a real partnership.
I like gypsy emojis better.
Okay, oh, be careful.
Well, we heard some commitments around data sharing, formal MOUs, really increasing significantly transfer, and we're going to hold you to all of those commitments, as you know. And President Drake, I love that you talked about diversity in the professoriate, because as you all know, we have, for the beginning of time, called for a much more diverse faculty where our students get to see themselves. And so tonight we celebrate the history of being able to be together again, the history-making reality of having 3 leaders of our public systems that are leaders of color, yet that diversity is not reflected amongst professors at the community colleges, at the Cal States, or at the UCs. So what are you going to do to change that so that our students feel included, welcomed, and represented on campus? President Drake.
Yeah, I believe firmly in doing all that we can to diversify our professoriate, our schools. We have the most diverse class this year that we've ever admitted. We graduated the most diverse class in our history last spring and admitted a more diverse class just these days, just today. Now 43% of our students, who are freshman students this year, are come from underrepresented backgrounds, so that's great, the highest that we've ever seen, and the highest that our one universities have ever seen anywhere in the history of the country. So we're pleased and proud of that, led by our colleagues at UC Merced. So we really are pushing forward, but we want next year to say the same thing, that we're moving forward every year. And we've done some things. We have a wonderful grant from the Mellon Foundation to increase our present postdoctoral fellowship program, which has been a great pathway for developing the professoriate. I'm a professor, my son is a professor. You know, we're doing the best we can in our family, one at a time to add people. But it's a long-standing need for us, and we're focused on it every day and doing the best we can to do it, and hope to be able to meet with you regularly and tell you that each year we're doing better than we did last year, and that's our goal.
This is my favorite topic. Here's what I'll say, and I think Chancellor Oakley was really well known for saying this, right? There is no silver bullet, but for us, it has always been about structural reform. We cannot fix this problem with only one angle, one solution. We fix it when we change the individual, when we change the interactions, when we change an institution. We started the work because of a report that the Campaign for College Opportunity actually published in 2018, and that was critical for our system to really advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. What that meant was connecting equal employment opportunity, so the hiring, to the classroom. Where we are today in 2021, even with the pandemic, is really thinking about how you integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion into the evaluation process, which opens up tenure review. And it's really about how do we all show up as educators, even if you are classified staff or in the classroom as a tenured faculty.
We have a lot of work to do. In my view, diversifying our faculty is connected to our success in closing equity gaps and increasing graduation rates. I'm encouraged that almost half of the new faculty we hired this year are from our people of color. And we can do even better than that in the coming years. Michael and I have talked about ways in which we can strengthen the connection between CSU and UC to see if more of our CSU graduates could get their doctorates in the UC, with the idea that we'd welcome them back to be professors. And I know we're going to work together in that way and in other ways as well.
Great. Well, I want to welcome Marlene Garcia. She's the Executive Director of the California Student Aid Commission. We're honored that she was able to join us tonight. She is a fellow Bruin like myself, but more importantly, she has been a tireless advocate and champion for students around transforming Cal Grant. And this year, we may see the biggest expansion in Cal Grant in the history of California. And we know that the opportunity to go to college doesn't exist unless a student can afford to go. Marlene, thanks for joining us. Share what you're most excited about in terms of financial aid with our audience and our system leaders.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share some thoughts and reflections with our distinguished panel and all of you distinguished leaders in the higher ed world. I have the opportunity to work every day on college affordability, and I know for many of you, you have a number of interests you have to balance in the work that you do. But I consider it a privilege and an honor that I actually every day get to work on college affordability, what we need to do to make students able to pay for college, to pay for those basic needs that we know are essential to get through the college pipeline. We know who's dropping out because they can't eat or they're living in cars. They're the least among us. They're the ones who are the lowest income students. Not all low income students are created equal. Some are low income, some are incredibly low income. And I worry about that because the system, as proud as I am about the Cal Grant system, I was a Cal Grant recipient myself, and never could have gone to college and succeeded without that support. So I have this passion project. And I think about a dear friend of mine and mentor, Jack Scott. He would always say, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And this crisis, by God, we are in it deep, and we're not going to waste this crisis. So we are working with all of you to really move this financial aid reform across the finish line. This has been an incredible year. What has already been invested at the state and federal levels, we've already seen incredible investments in the State Budget Act this year. Expanding Cal Grant. At the federal level, we've seen them streamline FAFSA, and they're now seriously talking, after 20 years, of significantly enhancing and removing eligibility barriers for the Pell Grant. So we in California have the opportunity to finish the job, and I think about not just those students that are struggling and hungry every day when they're trying to get through college, but I think about those first-generation students who are trying to navigate this maze of a financial aid system. Everyone can agree on one thing. You need to have a degree to get financial aid so that you can go to college. We want to change that. So that's why Cal Grant reform is important, and we think it's really critical to streamline it as well as enhance it and remove those barriers so that everyone gets that fair shot to get that beloved degree.
Thank you, Marlene. And to close this amazing panel, one sentence that I didn't share beforehand, so on the spot. Chancellor Castro, what do you hope your legacy will be when you retire?
That we've closed equity gaps in the CSU, and that our students at a higher level in the same way. That's what I'd love it to be.
Chancellor Gonzalez.
Through the next generation of leaders that will take this to the next level.
I retired, so I'll tell you what I said when I finished, was that we really wanted to improve access, affordability, and excellence, and to do all three at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Welcome back, everyone. Wasn't that a great first panel to kick off our night? It was super exciting. My name's Audrey Dow, and I'm the Senior Vice President at the Campaign for College Opportunity. It's so great to see so many friends and allies in the audience that we just haven't seen in person for a year and a half, so I echo all the sentiments about being back in person. It's really nice to be here with everyone. We couldn't be here tonight without the generosity of some key sponsors that really believe and continue to support the work that the campaign does, and wanted to ensure that we had this special night. So I want to give an official thank you to our sponsors, the Michelson 20 Million Minds Foundation. I see Phil Kim and Mayra Lombera here from the foundation. Please, everyone, say hello to them. They are an amazing organization doing work and are completely bought into the work we do here at the campaign. We have a number of CSU campuses and UC campuses that were in support of tonight's evening as well, including UC Merced. Sir Chancellor Munoz, wherever you are, thank you for your generosity in supporting us this evening. I also just want to quickly recognize a couple of our campaign board members that are here tonight. You met our chair, Estela Ben-Simon, our outgoing chair, Tom Sainz back there. Hello, Tom. Thank you for being with us. As well as Maria Anguiano, a UC regent who is also on our board of directors. So thank you, board members, for being here this evening. I have the pleasure of continuing our discussion with President Drake, but also welcoming to the stage here UC Board of Regents Chair Cecilia Estelano. Thank you for being with us. And we're going to be focusing for the next few minutes on UC specifically. I've had a chance to work with Cecilia for maybe almost 10 years now. I've known you for a couple of years. And one thing I can say definitively about Chair Estelano is that what you see is what you get. Chair Estelano really believes in her heart in student success, and she's impatient for it. She is absolutely impatient. She wants to see transformative change because she knows the high stakes that exist for our students. She understands that every year we don't fix transfer, every year we don't tackle capacity, every year we don't tackle affordability is a generation of students who cannot contribute to the California economy. And I'm always in awe of the work that you do, the tenacity you show. And I couldn't be more thrilled that you are at the helm of our UC system. So thank you for that. Chair Estelano, when you took the reins of the Regents, you talked about the commitment you would like to see the UC make and the state make to increasing capacity. We know that capacity issues aren't just a challenge at the freshman level for students wanting to get a seat there, but also for transfer students. It is a real challenge. And the more K-12 gets better at producing students who complete A to G, the more our community colleges are producing students ready to transfer, will the UC be able to accept and absorb them and have those students take up their rightful spot. So I'd like to open up with what you are envisioning around the issue of capacity and how we really can start ensuring that students who deserve a spot have one.
Well, thank you, Audrey. That was a very generous introduction, and I was kind of blushing there. So on the capacity, it's one of the main reasons why I wanted to take on the chairmanship of the Board of Regents. And you're right, I am an impatient person because I know the benefit of a UC education. It absolutely transforms lives. It is the greatest engine of economic mobility we have in the state of California, and I would say in the nation. So how are we going to do it? I don't have an exact plan. What I know is that we provide value because we hold out excellence, affordability, access, support, right? And we also have a sense here on this Board of Regents, which is unlike the Board of Regents that served when I was a law student from 95 to 98. That Board of Regents did all of those things that Estela Ben-Simon was talking about that were going in the wrong direction. This Board of Regents could not be more different. And this Board of Regents places equity at the center of what we do. So we have to expand. We have to expand capacity, but we're going to have to do it in different ways. I love UC Merced. I love visiting it. I always feel so inspired when I meet the students, but I'm also realistic. We're not going to be able to build the 3 or 4 or 5 more UC Merceds that we need to build if we're going to achieve what we ought to in terms of expanding capacity. So we need to be smarter and more efficient about it. We need to figure out what we can do in a variety of different campuses. The answers will be different for different campuses. But we also need to look at the lessons we've learned during the pandemic and that pivot to remote learning. That we can use remote instruction and hybrid instruction in a way to provide access to more students, not just in our areas surrounding our immediate campuses, but also in places like the far north, Imperial County, more parts of the Central Valley. Because if you ask me, when I talk about diversity and access, it's not just racial and ethnic, that's very important, but it's also diversity through this incredible state. Everybody in California should feel like they have a chance at having benefit from the University of California. And I don't think that that's the case now. I think there are folks in the far north and Imperial County and in the Central Valley who feel like it's out of reach, and even parts of the Inland Empire. So when I talk about it, I really want to make sure we maintain our standards of excellence. And you noted, more of our students are coming out eligible for UC. More of our students from the community colleges are well prepared to compete at the UC level. So we need to create more seats for them, more access. We're going to have to do that using remote instruction by expanding capacity, better use of summer school, reducing the time to degree. How about sharing resources and campuses with maybe some of our other segmental partners? Community colleges, I love sitting on the board of governors of community colleges. That's where you and I first started working together. But community colleges are in every corner of the state of California. What if we were to share access to those resources? What if we were to have UC professors teach students at the community colleges? There's many ways we can look at creative ways of expanding our footprint and the impact that we have in the state of California. The last thing I'll say, and I could talk about this forever, Audrey, so I'm going to stop. The last thing I'll say is I'm an urban planner, right? So the thing that I always think about is that every time you put down a campus in the University of California, you've created enormous economic vitality for the surrounding community, right? Every place we have a campus is this node of economic vitality, innovation, and advancement for people from all kinds of backgrounds. So, is there a way that we create more of those nodes without building a new campus? Can we find places to locate educational hubs where somebody can access community college, Cal State, UC, from remote locations, have access to labs, have access to world-class professors, but in remote locations by sharing resources so that we have a lower climate impact, but we have a bigger educational and economic impact. So that's kind of my long-winded answer. Thanks, Audrey.
Yes. President Drake, the same questions and your reaction to Chair Estolano's vision, I think, for increased capacity. I was so grateful, I think, to hear some of those really innovative ideas that aren't solely just on more dollars for capacity, which we know we need, but that is really a use of existing resources, of a true partnership with the community colleges to deliver a broader education. So would love your thoughts and reactions.
I agree with my chair. I agree with my chair, and that really is true. And I've had a long career. This is my 17th year now as a chancellor or president. And so actually the thing that Chair Estolano meant are things that we've done in my prior career at the campus level, at my individual campuses at UC Irvine and then at the Ohio State University. We did a couple of things. One is we increased our retention rate so that students who came in actually got to stay in school, and that we're pleased about that. In both, kind of symmetrically, in both institutions during the time that I was there, we had an 18% increase in our four-year graduation rate. So we had more students staying in school and then graduating in 4 and in 6 years. And so we were doing everything we could to shorten the time to degree, and that actually created more capacity. Each of the institutions also grew dramatically in the size of the classes that we admitted and the numbers of graduates that we had each year. We were part of a thing called the University Innovation Alliance with 10 other universities, including UC Riverside around the country, and we dramatically increased the number of degrees that we were going to be granting during the time of our measurement. We had actually a 5-year goal of 60,000 increased degrees among these 11 universities. We had to change at 3 years and make it a 90,000 degree goal because we were going to exceed it too quickly. So we believe in that. And again, echoing Chair Estolano, we didn't do this by building new buildings. It wasn't just bricks and mortar and doing more of same. We had to use all of the things that the chair mentioned as ways to increase our capacity. So we increased dramatically summer. That worked very effectively. We had, again, I'll focus on my prior institution. We really focused on enhancing the in-person education with virtual and online education, so that 2 years ago now, in the fall of 2019, about 40% of resident students were taking online courses while they were living on campus. So it was a mixture of the two, and that made the curriculum easier to navigate and shortened time to degree. We actually had co-located campuses in regional campuses around the state. So we, in fact, shared resources and shared staff to be able to do that. And then we had, when appropriate, fully online degrees that people could take any place in the world. And I think, as we were saying earlier, it's not this thing or that thing or whatever, but all of the things together. So we're looking forward. We're meeting with chancellors. We have to actually have a chancellor's work group to see about how we can expand the number of students that are enrolled in our university over these coming years. We're looking to expand by roughly 20,000 students over this decade. So that's true. And our ratio now is 2 freshmen for each transfer student. That's our goal, and we meet our goal there. So that means more freshman students, but more transfer students as well. And we continue to grow our Merced campus. Had the privilege of being on the Merced Planning Committee 25 years ago, and then being able to visit the campus to see what came out of very little. So all of those things are growing forward all the time, and the more opportunity that we can create and the better value we can provide to our students means the more that we can contribute to the quality of life in our state and our nation and really around the world, and we're all for it.
Thank you, President Drake. And I see Acting Chancellor Gonzalez taking notes, so I know that there will be some text follow-ups in the coming days, which I'm grateful for. That's the point of these conversations. I want to turn for a minute to student experience at the University of California. You know, first of all, I'll say that I know that students wanting to apply to the system as freshmen see average GPAs, see what used to be the test scores, and think, wow, I have to be perfect to go there. I have to have perfect test scores, again, a perfect GPA. And for those California students who are lucky enough to get a spot, often they are welcomed by a campus that doesn't look like them, right? We've talked about that. The student body of California is 70% people of color, but our faculty are 70% white. How are you working at UC to ensure that students are coming into a welcoming environment that tells them they belong, as well as providing them the support services that they need to thrive, including ensuring that there's a diverse faculty? So whoever wants to take that first, I will defer to the two of you.
Yeah, so I appreciate that, and I mentioned that we're very pleased and proud of our entering class, which is the most diverse in our history, and we continue to move forward. You know, one of the things that's been the case, it's been a comment for my whole career. So I've been doing this for decades, and it would have been a conversation I could have had in 1975 or 1985 or 1995 or 2000, et cetera. And so we've continued to move forward. What we see is that we have been expanding really from the undergraduate education through graduate education to the faculty. It's 15 or 20 years to become a faculty member. And so it takes a long time to get there. And what we look to do is to continue to expand the pipeline, the opportunity for students to come into our university, to be shepherded through to graduate on time. Our graduation rates are the highest they've been, to narrow our achievement gaps. They were larger in the past. Some of our campuses now have actually narrowed the achievement gap and eliminated the achievement gap. That was the case at my prior campus at UC Irvine. I'm really pleased about that being the case between black and white students. So really work hard to do those things so that we can provide the support and the opportunity for students to join our faculty and move forward. I was on the Zoom a couple of weeks ago, And I was, this was a Zoom at my alma mater at UCSF, talking with students who were in the MD PhD program, medical doctor PhD program. The screen didn't have, it had about a dozen squares on it, but they were all African American. So we had MD PhD students, a couple of sponsors, but 9, 10 students. Certainly there were times when there was one MD, African American MD PhD student in the entire university, and having a screen full was something that we couldn't have seen 10 years ago and 20 years ago. So it's slow. Rome, wasn't built in a day. It's slow progress, but it's steady progress, and we want to continue to lean in to that and make it true. Let me, one final, this is the thing to say. You were mentioning the diversity of backgrounds that's represented with myself and my colleagues who lead our university systems, and it was the case also with Chancellor Ortiz-Oakley before, or with the leadership of the boards of our institutions, and how different that is than the way it would have been all through history until just a few years ago. Actually, it's the first time in history that it's been the case. But that evolution toward that was by taking myself out of the discussion. If I just look at my colleagues, these are people who are perfectly suited for, perfectly trained for, perfectly able to be the leaders of these systems. It's not that they were picked because of their backgrounds and their diversity. It's picked because they were the best people to be here at this time. And that took all of us working together for years to make that true. So this was a natural occurrence in several places that is the result of us working to try to diversify and be inclusive in our efforts, and we just need to continue to focus on that for the future.
Thank you. Chair Estelano, what are you holding the regents and President Drake accountable for by the time your term ends when it comes to this issue?
Well, the time my term ends is we only have 1-year terms as chair, so that's probably not so great. But I do want to say a couple of things about what are the standards that we're holding ourselves to. Incremental change is what we live with, but I can't accept that anymore right now because of where we are. We have a planet that's literally on fire. We have a planet where young people feel like, if you can't tell me how I'm going to make radical, drastic change in the next 5 to 10 years, I don't even want to listen to you. Those are our students, and those are the kids behind them, right? So we have to move faster than we normally would. We have to keep that slow incremental change, but there are some times when you have a rupture in time, and we're in that moment. We all felt it last year, right? Last summer, we could feel it, and it's continuing. So we at UC are uniquely positioned to help make the most of that rupture in time. And President Drake did not give himself credit. You asked about, campus climate, essentially. How do you make students of color feel more welcome? He didn't even mention his presidential campus safety plan, which is groundbreaking. I don't know that anybody ever talks about it, but believe me, within a year from now, you will be seeing this as a model that's been picked up by universities across the country. What he has done in terms of looking at campus safety and changing the equation and turning it on its head about creating a place that is welcoming to all students, where there's accountability, where there is data collected about when students are stopped and what circumstances. That data is collected in a standardized fashion. It will be reviewed. It will be investigated. People will be held accountable. Where we think about when we need uniformed police officers or when we need mental health professionals or counselors. We start with what is the need rather than what is the mandate, right? This is radical stuff. This is not a guy that comes across as radical, okay? And he would never say he is. But what he did with that presidential campus safety plan is big news. So yeah, will we hold ourselves accountable? We were just talking about it. President Drake was just saying to me that he felt like in a year we will have made substantial progress implementing this campus safety plan. I dare say that the LAPD could learn something from this plan. So I do want to say one more thing, though, about that incremental change.
We've been having our...
So this is why we need to expand capacity at the University of California. It's not just undergrads. It's graduate students, it's the professoriate, it's our staff, all right? Every person of color that's a staff person at the University of California has now entered the middle class, or very close to it. And they have good, solid jobs making great benefits. And their lives have been changed. If you're a staff member, If you're a professor at the University of California and you're a person of color or a woman, you are having an enormous impact. But to become that professor, you had to have gotten a graduate degree. Who is graduating the professors at the community colleges? Who's graduating or educating the professors at Cal State? It's UC. So when our legislators talk about expanding capacity and focus only on undergraduate admissions, all of you in all segments need to argue for graduate students. Because we're graduating, we are educating the professoriate of all segments, not just in California, but nationally. And when we hire professors, we're exceeding the applicant pool in terms of women and people of color in almost all categories. We're not doing so great on science, but we're going to do better. So if we have more slots to fill at UC in the professoriate, chances are we're going to be diversifying our faculty at a much more rapid rate that would otherwise happen. And we're also producing more PhDs and master's graduates who can teach at all of your institutions. So if we really want to make a difference on campus climate, get the professors to look like the kids, get the staff to look like the kids, because you remember when you were in school, who did you turn to when you needed help? It wasn't a professor. You know, it was the secretary, it was the janitor, it was the groundskeeper, it was the, you know, it was the assistant who kind of looked like you. I know that was the case at Bolt. It was the lady who ran the bookstore. That's where we all turned. So that's what we need to do. Sorry, I went on.
Thank you. Can you just give this panel a round of applause? Thank you, Chair Estelano. Thank you, President Drake. We are in good hands, I think, and look forward to working with you. We're going to take another minute break while we move to the next panel. Thank you.
Okay, we are going to continue the conversation. I want to just kick off by thanking everyone for joining us this evening. I'm Jessie Ryan, Executive Vice President of the Campaign for College Opportunity, and we have many of you with us in person, but many more watching remotely. And I think that we have to appreciate the beautiful atmosphere and the sounds of downtown LA that we get to enjoy as we have this dynamic conversation. So when I heard that I was going to have the opportunity to moderate the community college panel, I was supremely grateful because, as many of you know, I am a proud product of California community colleges, having been the daughter of a struggling single mother and attending 3 community colleges simultaneously to transfer within 2 years, one of less than 3% of students that would do that. For me, community colleges were, as they are for the vast majority of students across the state, the gateway to opportunity. And so to get to work with a system that has been bold, courageous, and radically student-centered, especially over the last few years, has been a dream come true. I want to say and welcome the Chair of the Board of Governors, Pamela Haynes. I have had, and let's give her a round of applause, the pleasure of knowing Pam Haynes as well as Acting Chancellor Gonzalez for more than a decade. And anyone who has come in contact with Pam Haynes knows that she is a courageous voice for racial equity and for students. There has never been a policy too ambitious or bold if she believed that it would result in structural reform that would in fact address inequities that had plagued students for so long. She is also one of the longest serving trustees at a local level for Los Rios Community College District across the state. So as a local leader, as a statewide champion, as a radically student-centered ally in the work, I am so proud to get to have the conversation with Pam tonight, as well as with Acting Chancellor Gonzalez. I want to just take one moment to pause, and I want us to appreciate that Acting Chancellor Gonzalez is only the second woman in the history of the community college system to hold this role. We have high expectations and a tremendous amount of work to get done. So I'm going to just jump right into it. 5 years ago, under Chancellor Oakley's leadership, we saw a bold new vision for community colleges. A vision with ambitious goals rooted in the vision for success, Goals including increasing transfer to the CSU and UC. Goals including decreasing the unnecessary accumulation of units. And goals that were not to just close racial equity gaps, but to eliminate racial equity gaps at the 115 community colleges across the state. Brave, ambitious, and radically student-centered in the nature. So I'd like to start with you, Acting Chancellor Gonzalez. What work has been done to achieve those goals? And given the current conditions, what are the most pressing issues that remain?
A lot of unfinished work. We are very proud of the work that we've done, but what is critical to understand is that we were managing 5 different structural things, right? So operating a system that needed to be fixed while building the infrastructure that will make that incremental change sustainable. Where we are today is certainly, over the last 3 years, we have met our credential attainment. That was something that we have done over the last 3 years. However, it was always a reach goal, right? And this board has been incredibly thoughtful about every time we meet a goal, we have to go back to the drawing board and reimagine what does California need. So we have met our credential attainment, our transfer rates, we have met those. We have also redesigned in 2018, we actually went back and we had to be more ambitious, believe it or not. And the board said, yes, we will be more ambitious in terms of students who graduate with a career technical degree. What is it that they need? Where we have a lot of unfinished work is certainly units, the number of units that it takes for our students to complete their education. Some progress, but slow progress. And that should worry all of us, literally all of us, because it's critical for transfer. The other 2 pieces are that as we are seeing changes in closing equity gaps and certainly regional gaps, we are still seeing the same challenges with what it means for poverty to exist by zip code in this country, in this state. So the unfinished work is still closing equity gaps, certainly for African American students. And then more importantly, in some of the biggest regions, and we're lucky to be in LA, we're lucky to be in California, but regionally, we have a lot of work to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Acting Chancellor Gonzalez, I'm so appreciative of you acknowledging that we have urgent work to do and there has been incremental progress. But if we're not reaching for something better, recognizing that we're failing students today, we will never see the kind of progress, the bold progress necessary to change the system. I want to turn to you, Chair Haynes. You have been, from the very beginning, one of the statewide leaders around remedial education reform. You understood that potentially the greatest civil rights lever that we have seen in community colleges in 3 decades was providing an opportunity for equitable access to placement and entry into college-level math and English. And you, from the very beginning, advocated full-throatedly for those changes. Now we've seen, with the campaign proudly sponsoring that legislation and the Chancellor's office as a key partner, tremendous progress. Thousands of students across the state gaining access who would not have access. Incredible improvements for Black students across the state. But there is uneven implementation. What Daisy said is true. Your zip code still determines your destiny in terms of your access for college-level math and English classes. What can we do to ensure that 705 is implemented true to the intent of the law and that all students, irrespective of where they live, have the chance to go into college-level math and English and succeed?
So it's time to have a little bit of real talk. And we have 115 colleges that are independent. The districts are independent. And so and it has been uneven. The reality is that we have to get down, and our faculty, and faculty have been wonderful. There are lots of faculty that have been wonderful in doing this work. But we really have to begin to have a conversation at the course level. We're talking about English and math. Those have been the gateway courses. Those have been the barrier courses. And so if we're not talking about curriculum, then we are missing one of the points of doing all of this work. What we have found is when it gets down to the course level and the department level, if there's communication with faculty about between themselves about what it is they're doing in the classroom, and if they're looking at their data, their own data on their course, then they're beginning, and they have that conversation, they begin to have the conversation about, okay, what is it that you're doing that you're more successful than what I'm doing? And if there is no retribution relative to that, and folks are saying, for the betterment of me and my students, what can I do better in the classroom to help make change? When that conversation happens, and when there are resources for faculty to get what they need professionally, and there is an ability to do that, then you do see success. But it is uneven. Some campuses are doing that, and some campuses are not. And we need to work much more collaboratively about that without a retribution on oh, you're a bad teacher. This is not about being a bad teacher. It's about having the resources in order to be the very best you can be.
And I love what you said, that we have to use the data to inspire us to implement for the benefit.
Absolutely. And before AB 705, there were very few colleges and faculties that were actually looking at their own data. There are very few in this case of really knowing what really happened to that student that failed. What happens to them after they leave your classroom? And so the data has to inform the decision making on what comes next.
I couldn't agree more. Beautifully said, Chair Haynes. So I'm going to turn to transfer now, because as we know, our ability to ensure that students successfully enter classes that will count towards their progression and successful transfer is a piece of ensuring a truly simplified and streamlined transfer pathway for students across the state. We know there's been a huge focus on transfer this year, both with the governor's budget, with the recovery with equity task force recommendations, and with 928 that is sitting on the governor's desk right now. While we might not agree on all elements of the policy, what I think we do agree on is that 3% two-year transfer rates, 6-year transfer rates that are less than 28% for community college students across the state are unacceptable. And so, Chancellor Gonzalez, I would love to ask you, what strategies are you employing? What are you doing to ensure that the community college commitment for transfer is met? And how will you, if AB 928 is signed into law, implement with fidelity?
Well, first I'll say we are very optimistic. We are ready to get to work. And I think as we think about this solution and implementing, it'll be important to stay focused on the data. So I think one of the first things on the agenda is deeply understanding the ADTs and the inequalities that still exist there. I think as we think about why students are not only pursuing an ADT and then they are admitted, but then we lose more than 50% of them by the time they actually enroll, is something that needs to be investigated, and that the campaign has been a leader in highlighting. So a deeper understanding of our data so that we can find real solutions around that. The other big piece of this is designing the ecosystem, right? While the ADT works for some, the HBCU transfer process also works for other students. And we also have baccalaureate degree programs in California's community colleges. But the most important thing is really financial aid. Financial aid, right? I wouldn't be here if I didn't have Cal Grant, if I didn't have Chafee. As we think about that, that's the ecosystem for transfer for us. Staying focused, and that's the vision for success. On the actual redesign, so an incredibly important tool, the piece of legislation, staying optimistic and really focus on the vision for success. The last thing I'll highlight is there is no other system that is committed to transfer like California's community colleges. Why? I think about the prior panel. I started off as a community college student. I got a PhD. I became that TA. I became that faculty member, and I am now here. It is a whole pipeline. And what is important to remember about our vision for success in our system is that no other system has attached the ADT to their funding formula. It is a key lever. Those are the incentives that are really going to help us achieve the goals for our students. So we stand ready to work. Pam and I are ready. We have to convene our system, and we are very optimistic.
And I have to say, Acting Chancellor Gonzalez, one of the bright spots, one of the pieces that gives me the most hope is you have said, each as system leaders, that you're talking to one another, that you respect one another, that you're acting with a sense of urgency. If 928 is passed, there will be a forum for intersegmental dialogue that has to be happening, not just between the system leaders, but across various levels of each of the systems to ensure that in real time, structural changes that you talked about are being tackled head on for the benefit of students. So we're going to end this panel with a couple, I believe, more lighthearted and hopefully fun questions, lightning rounds, if you will. I have 2 questions to ask you, and I think everyone in this room would love to know. If you had, as the women warriors that you are, a magic wand and could fix one issue in the community college system, what would that be and why? 30 seconds, and I'm going to start with Pam.
So if I was the good witch of the north with my wand, there is inequity in the funding of community colleges relative to the 2 million students that we serve. And so if I had a wand, we would completely close that equity gap. We started off saying, we all said our students are in need. There is poverty, and as a result of that, those income levels, it is harder. So we would have to reduce the time to completion, and those are and there are things that and supports. There need for. I know this was be short. I'm sorry.
I'll give you my time.
There's a need to make certain wraparound supports for our students. They are older students. We got to make certain all those barriers for financial aid are removed so that they can move through our systems and to eliminate all of those challenges or help to eliminate those challenges that they face.
I couldn't agree more. Acting Chancellor Gonzalez?
You won't be surprised when I say financial aid.
Yep.
And I think normalizing things like competency-based education, really that innovation, that's, I think, what is going to help community colleges think about the next phase on how we help students succeed.
Absolutely. Well, let's give both Acting Chancellor Gonzalez and Chair Haynes a round of applause. We are in good hands with their courageous and insightful leadership. So we are going to move right into our panel conversation with Chancellor Castro and with Chair Lillian Kimbell. I have to say I am also incredibly proud to get to lead this conversation because I am also made in the CSU, the People's University, and would not be here today were it not for the incredible education I had at San Francisco State University. But I first met Chancellor Castro in the Central Valley doing very important work to change education and equity dynamics in a region so often left behind. I also want to welcome and thank Chair Lillian Kimbell, who has been not just someone who has brought her legal expertise as a lawyer to her role leading the CSU trustees, but is one of the trustees that has intentionally, throughout her time, brought in student voice, shared student stories, and challenged her peers to hear those lived experiences to help them arrive at difficult decisions. And I want to thank you for centering so much of what you do in that student experience. So I am going to jump right in with the hard conversation around capacity. We know that the CSU system is an opportunity for so many first-generation students to reach their college dreams. And yet what we have seen over the years is that due to an unavailability of seats, there is rising selectivity, and it is becoming more and more difficult for students to find those critical spots. The campaign has been proud to advocate alongside the CSU and the UC for additional capacity resources. And yet what we've seen is that campuses have been forced to declare that they are at full enrollment capacity through impaction at the CSU campus level and at the major level. And so what we want to hear is that in the face of these real challenges, what are you doing through innovative strategies to address the capacity conundrum? And what are the long-term policies and investments that you're hoping will finally upend this dynamic?
Okay, we weren't sure how you wanted to do this. Well, we clearly need to expand capacity within the CSU. When I look at enrollments across California within the CSU, we have extreme pressure in the San Joaquin Valley and in Southern California. And so I'm thankful that the governor and legislature, with support from the campaign, have advocated along with us for additional resources. We think we'll get about 9,000 more FTE in the upcoming budget year, and we will allocate those to the campuses that have the most significant needs, the ones in the San Joaquin Valley and in Southern California primarily that have the extreme demand issues. And I would say that the other way that we will be able to expand capacity besides investment is by accelerating our graduation rates and closing equity gaps and making sure we have enough, the flow is right so that as students graduate faster, we'll be able to accommodate more of them. And so those are the two strategies that we're working on right now. And I want to thank you for the help from the campaign, for the resources to do this.
We're grateful to be partners. And I actually think that that's a perfect segue to the next question, which I'm going to direct to you, Chair Kimball. So this really is around the graduation initiative. You know, we know that there has been a significant investment in time and energy in ensuring that the graduation initiative is, in an ambitious fashion, driving us towards better student outcomes. We are incredibly encouraged by the growth we have seen as a result of the graduation initiative, and yet persistent racial inequities remain. And so I would love to hear, in your leadership position, what are you doing to ensure that the graduation initiative is meeting its imperative towards closing racial equity gaps?
Admit it has been probably the most persistent, sticky issue that we've had since I've been on the board, the equity gaps, and certain campuses have done much better than others. I think one thing we saw with the pandemic is so clearly the disparities that result from lack of internet access and basic needs, whether it's food or housing. So I think that firstly is addressing those basic student needs. And I think that we have tried to do that. That would lead me to talk about my big issue since getting on the board and becoming chair is addressing the financial issue that we have. And yes, right now, you know, we're like so thrilled at this budget, which when I became chair, you know, we were thinking we're going off the cliff. And wow, you know, couldn't have been farther from the truth, but the reality is what goes up must come down. And it's part of that bizarre world that we're in now where tech companies like Amazon, you know, food delivery companies, tech companies, all these things, these companies have made tremendous amounts of money, right? And so because we are so, our state budget is so, relies on income tax and capital gains tax, that's why we're seeing this, we're flush now. But we will not be, I can kind of guarantee it, we won't be, we don't know when it's going to happen, but we're going to be dealing with the same issue that we were dealing with in 2009. So that, to me, is the issue from which everything else stems. Now, of course, what we're doing with the graduation initiative and our 6 pillars, one of them is belongingness, which is very important when you're dealing with imposter syndrome, issues around guidance for students, for me as a first generation student, and I always feel I was an accidental, I'm an accidental chair. I don't know how I got here, because I went to public school in LA back in the day, and I don't remember ever seeing a college counselor. And this was the golden age of California education. That always kind of cracks me up, because I asked there were 4 of us. My mom had a kid every year, and asked my brother and my sister, did you ever see a college counselor? No, nobody remembers. So it was just so happenstance. I applied UCLA, I applied to my community college. Well, you didn't even know, I don't think you needed to apply in those days. And I applied to CSUN. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, and I got in, and my parents said, you can't afford to go to, you can't live there. So got in my little car and drove every day. But I digress. But I think those issues of affordability, which stem from, as Marlene talked about, the funding, student aid, Pell Grants, absolutely we need to address the increase we need for Pell Grants, which used to provide 77% back, I think, when I was in college, and it's now 28%. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think we're trying to do that. And right now things look pretty good, but I really have a lot of trepidation about what is going to happen next year or in 2 years.
I think my mic is up. I think we're good again. Yeah. One of the things that you said that I think is so key is that in some ways you were lucky that you ended up in the position that you did. And what you're trying to do with the graduation initiative is systemically tackle issues from financial aid access to ensuring equitable access to coursework to ensuring the supports necessary. And advising, taking out the luck and ensuring that all students have those same opportunities. I so appreciate that.
And I know that the question you asked, Joe, I think talk about capacity. I do think the silver lining in the pandemic has been around, virtual teaching, because I think that really will enable us to expand accessibility, and certainly for students who are homebound, either carrying has been a silver lining that we're still working out how we're going to implement it, but it's absolutely going to be it has been a game changer.
Chancellor Castro, sure. Last year the Campaign for College Opportunity with an incredible equity coalition led an effort to fight an admissions change requirement at the CSU that would have added an additional year of quantitative reasoning. Now I know that we are still waiting the results of a study, but I would like to hear from you in particular. In your leadership role, what are you doing to ensure more equitable admissions for students across the state?
Thank you. Well, I also want to express my appreciation to the campaign for their advocacy around this issue. I still remember Chair Kimball and I talked about this issue at the very beginning of my tenure, and we both felt the same way, which is we did not want to place any barriers, additional barriers. There are already plenty of other barriers that we're trying to eliminate, but we didn't want to add barriers, and that's why we're taking a very deliberate approach on the QR issue and studying it carefully. What are we doing right now? Well, we're trying to ensure that all of our campuses are open and accessible to our students. We have the most diverse student body in our history. We had the largest enrollment in our history this year. We had the highest number of graduates in our history. And yet, I know with this pandemic, as time has gone on, we will see I believe, some effects on retention and graduation, and I'm concerned about that. And so we're doing everything we can to support our students with basic needs, with all the other advising support, things that Lily talked about. And then in terms of the system part with schools, trying to make sure that we're preparing as many diverse teachers as we can. And we know that by focusing even more attention on that, that we'll be able to make a significant difference in the K through 12 space. We all know that we need more teachers of color in K through 12. With my own son, who's 10 years old, I've found very few teachers of color, very few male teachers of color. And so we have work to do, and we will be accelerating our efforts there as well.
Thank you. I so appreciate that response. We had a conversation with Governor Newsom a bit ago, and he said, you can't be what you can't see. And so what you are doing is you're ensuring that students are inspired by faculty members who look like them, that will encourage them to be the teachers of tomorrow and change these dynamics. So I am going to end with what I hope is another lighthearted question. I think it would be really tone deaf if we didn't recognize how difficult a time this has been for our students, for our institutional leaders, for our state, for our country. But in these challenging times, there have been bright spots. And so I would love each of you to share in closing a bright spot in the CSU, in your pandemic response, in the resiliency in your student work, and how that has inspired you as you continue to grow your leadership.
Well, to begin with, I mentioned before, I think the bright spot where we were catapulted into becoming the largest online university probably in the world. Something, just like work from home, right? People have been talking about that for as long as I can remember. Now people were actually doing it, and now we go through the difficulty of who do we bring back, when do we bring them back? Same thing with online education. I think that our faculty, many of them really had maybe no interest in learning to teach online, or very little comfort with it, and it was this inadvertent, huge, undesired experiment, but I think that it has really produced a lot of amazing things for the university, and that being number one. Secondly, I do think I saw such a real concern for the inequities that were revealed for so many students that were working, that were essential workers. So many of our students have to work, like community college students, and a lot of them work full time and have 2 or 3 jobs and have children. And they had to be out there exposing themselves to this dangerous virus. I think there was that recognition and compassion that maybe wasn't quite as pronounced before, and maybe something that we have all, in the world sort of hopefully learned.
Beautiful. Chancellor Castro.
Sure. Before I answer the question, you've been asking me about changes at the CSU. There are 2 visible changes I want to acknowledge right now. Dr. Sylvia Alva is our brand new Executive Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs, made in the CSU, born in LA, first generation to college student, and now she's our Chief Academic Officer. And then Lawrence Salinas, our Vice Chancellor for University Relations, also made in the CSU, and those are 2 visible leadership changes that are already paying huge dividends for the CSU. In terms of answering your question, I've had so many incredible moments in the first 9 months, but the best moments for me have been with our students. And there was one afternoon when I was doing a visit to San Bernardino, the CSU San Bernardino campus. And I think Larry was on there with me. It was a Zoom with ASI student leaders. And I've never seen this before, but every one of the student leaders were women of color. Every single one. And they all had these incredible stories that they told me. And some of them were very sad. I mean, one had a father who was deported while he was working. Another was ill, had an illness during the pandemic that made it very risky for her to do anything outside of her home. Others were homeless. Every single one of those students was getting ready to graduate. They were leading at their campus, and they're going to be leaders in our state. And it makes me so grateful to be able to serve in a system that has students like that. And it's that times 500,000. How lucky are we to be in a system like that in California to help lift up our state and our country. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Beautiful said. Let's give this panel a round of applause. We're just going to close out and acknowledge not just the CSU, but the community college system and the UC. You are growing the leaders of tomorrow, resilient leaders that are going to meet the challenges of this country and this world head on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is the bonus session because we couldn't end tonight's beautiful event without celebrating and witnessing history in the making, which is to have the three of you, chairs of our University of California, the chair of the Cal State University System, and the chair of the Board of Governors for California Community Colleges, Cecilia Estelano, Lillian Kimbell, and Pamela Haynes. Thank you for your leadership and sacrifice. We know you do not get paid the big bucks to do the good work that you do every single day, and we are so grateful for you. You represent the diversity of our state, and I know that we all, four of us, have something even more important in common. We're all UCLA Bruins, so when this session ends, we're doing the 8 clap.
All right.
But in all seriousness, ladies, I have to say as a first-gen student, when I went to college in Claremont, I remember walking around campus feeling like I had been dropped in another universe. Even though I was only 30 miles away from home, I felt like I was a million miles away because I looked around and didn't see very many people that looked like me. And it wasn't until I saw a professor who was Latino, who had grown up and had a very similar experience that I felt, okay, he got a PhD, he could do it, so can I. And I think each of you represent that to everybody watching, so thank you. Thank you for your leadership and for everything that you do. Most importantly, thank you for caring about racial equity. So I want to start with that. And Pam, I'll start with you. What do you think is the most important thing that you can do to address the racial equity gaps that continue to persist in higher education?
I think I have to talk with urgency. I think I have to broach uncomfortable conversations. I have to call it as I see it, and work continually in every piece of work that I do. I use that particular lens. And I think that it has to be that way, that nothing can go past the work that we do without looking at it from that lens. Who is making it through? How are we closing those gaps? Making certain that we're looking at all of the data through those lenses. If we don't, then we are missing the greatest potential that we have, and that is in the populations in which we serve, the students, because they look like us.
I think my experience is a little bit different. My mother was from Mexico. My father was a gringo. And I don't really think, people don't look at me and say, oh, she's a Latina, but I am. I'm a half Latina. And I think, so my experience was a little bit different. I mentioned a little before how growing up, my dad did not go to college. And it's funny, I think, wow, the that saying the future is female, and it's feeling like the future is really brown and female, at least at the CSU. And it's funny because I'm starting to become concerned about the guys. At the CSU, we're, I think, 58% female, 42% men. And I know a lot of campuses, particularly with Black and brown men, are having real difficulties getting through and actually beginning. I have 2 sons, and I actually have to, my husband will probably get mad, but my younger son did not graduate. He went to a UC and left, and nobody reached out to him, and I pleaded with him for Mother's Day every year, and for Christmas he would ask me what I wanted. I said, I want you to go back and get your degree. Now, he was not food insecure, home, he has no excuse as far as I'm concerned. But I think, now I'm looking at this whole issue with we have come very, very far. I'm starting to look at that and look at, groups that we've caught up, we need to be addressing more, and something that has concerned me.
If this is going to go on. I think there we go. What I can do the most as chair of the UC Board of Regents on addressing the racial equity gap is to challenge every member of UC community, alumni, students, faculty, staff, chancellors, Office of the President, to be the very best values of UC. Because it's more diverse than it's ever been, but it's still not enough. And people are smart there. They can solve any problem. They are curing cancer. They literally came up with the basis for the mNRA. That happened at UC. If we can defeat this virus in record time because of the ingenuity of UC, we can sure as hell figure out how to accelerate eliminating the racial gap at the University of California. I have no doubt we can do that. And so my job is to say we can do it. You all have the best intentions. Dig deeper, go farther, go faster. That's my job as the chair. I don't have the details worked out. I don't have to, because there's all these brilliant people at UC. But my job is to inspire and make people believe in their best selves, right? That's what we do on these boards.
Well, brilliant people at the UC, brilliant people at our community colleges, at our Cal States. We heard from President Drake, Chancellor Castro, Chancellor Gonzalez earlier. They made commitments about how they're going to work together on transfer. I wonder, after hearing these conversations, I'd like to get your reactions. What are you willing to champion? What they do in collaboration can't happen without your tenacity and support. So I want to start with you, Board of Trustee Chair Kim Bell. What do you hear in terms of opportunities for collaboration across these 3 higher education systems?
I think the ADT is very important, and I'm absolutely with the campaign on strengthening that and making it work better. We have half of our students are transfer students, and it's so many students are still not making it to the CSU or to a UC that I think that is number 1.
I'm willing to do almost anything, to be really honest. And what I see is critically important. We have the 3 leaders of the 3 systems talking to each other. Okay, first step, absolutely huge. They got to be on speed dial. And they got to be willing, when somebody says, this is a barrier, to say, okay, then we're going to work on it together. That's the other piece of it. If there's a barrier for transfer, if there's not enough seats, then we're going to work on it together, because they're all our students. If there is a problem with too many units not transferring over, then we need to do something. If there is a problem with not having the core curriculum that's in alignment, then we need to do something together. It can't be just one system doing it by itself, and it can't be, well, we support that, but if we're not doing it together, then it's not going to happen. And I'm with this urgency piece, because time's a wasting.
So from what we heard tonight, I'm with Pam 100%. Like, the biggest thing we heard tonight is that these three leaders talk all the time. I don't know if we've had that before. And yeah, I suspect that Daisy is going to be on President Drake's speed dial, I imagine. But I think the thing that I have heard is this notion of really trying to figure out that clear pathway, the clear messaging to a kid who right now is in middle school. How do I go from here to there? Like, make it as clear as possible, not just the pathway, but how am I going to pay for it? And that has to be seamless communication through all three segments. We got to go fix student aid together, because we're more powerful if all three segments go in together to the governor and say, let's modernize Cal Grant. Like, that's, like, why don't we just go do that? If we did that, that could be transformative. The second thing is, we may disagree on the transfer stuff, like the way to get there. We don't disagree on the importance. And we do not disagree that it should be easy for kids from all of the community colleges, not the top 5 or 6, but all community colleges, to be able to get into a CSU or a UC in a clear pathway. And it shouldn't be that you have to have like some weird kind of LSAT test rubric to figure out how to get the right courses, right? So we can solve that. We may disagree on how, but we know we need to solve it, and it's my problem too. It's not just Daisy's problem. It's not just Pam's problem, right? It's UC's problem, because we need, again, we need to reach into every corner of the state, because every corner of the state pays taxes to support our three segments. So we need to benefit every corner of the state. So I think those two things, right? Student aid, let's go together. Second, let's figure out transfer.
In terms of collaboration, I wanted to go back to my overreaching obsession with our funding. I would like to see more creativity and urgency in coming up with something different about how we are going to fund the three systems. And I've sort of thought and written a couple articles about what are we going to do, a Prop 98 for UC and Cal State. We could, a service tax in our economy is 80% services now. It's not taxed, right? So our whole system has turned upside down in terms of taxation. There are, a tech tax on big tech, right? Who use our, they want our students, but they're really not. They have stepped up. We have this partnership with Google now, but just imagine if there was some sort of tax on advertising. We just need to get creative, I think. And if we're all together and our brilliant faculty, thinking about these issues, because the way it is now, the general fund is only supporting us at about 50%. It used to be back, when I was in school, I think it was close to 80%, 70%. So it's just not a viable proposition anymore the way this is going forward, and we need to do more. We're doing it with less. I know that we are. So I wish we could come together to advocate either, with an initiative or something to increase funding.
So I think we've heard commitments for collaboration. I suspect all of you have each other's cell phone numbers, and if not, we'll get them before this evening ends. I think all of you who are here tonight, who are watching us on the live stream, can see why we're so excited to have these incredible, amazing, committed, passionate women leading our system, who can talk about equity not just for students of color, but for male students who are underrepresented as well. So join me in giving them a big round of applause. And this is just the beginning of a conversation that we hope to continue with each and every one of you. So it's my pleasure now to introduce to you our former board chair, Tom Sines, who's also the president and general counsel of MALDEF, and a civil rights and national icon who has fought for equal educational treatment for all here in this country. Tom, thank you for joining us this evening with closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. And thanks to all of you. We're in the home stretch, but wow, what an incredibly inspiring evening for those of us here in person, as well as those of you online. I think we have seen something unprecedented. I have a very short agenda this evening, which is thanks, acknowledgement, and then it wouldn't be an education presentation without a little homework. So let me start with the thanks. I want to thank all of our panelists, President Drake, Chancellor Castro, Chancellor Gonzalez, Chair Estolano, Chair Kimball, Chair Haynes. Thank you for being here tonight and for all that you've said about what you've accomplished and what you look to accomplish in the future. We've heard commitment, creativity, and candor. And I want to pause for a moment on that last one, because what we have seen from these leaders of color of our three systems in California is a level of candor and transparency that really should be expected everywhere, of every publicly funded and publicly governed college or university system in the country. Unprecedented. And that's what you get when you see transformative leadership as acknowledged by my successor as chair of the campaign, Estela Ben-Simon. So thank you to all of our panelists. Second, I want to acknowledge the critical work of the Campaign for College Opportunity. As President and General Counsel of MALDEF, I have the great pleasure not just of having been the immediate past chair of the board of the campaign, but to lead an organization, MALDEF, that is one of the institutional founders of the Campaign for College Opportunity. And we take a great pride in that history. Now, I am loath ever to correct my always correct successor as chair of the board, but I'm going to make an exception here because her mission was out of humility. And that is that Estela Ben-Simon recognized the three super women who run the Campaign for College Opportunity, but she neglected to recognize that it is now led by 4 super women, including Estela Ben-Simon. And what Estela brings transitions me to the homework assignment, which is Estela brings to the board an encyclopedic knowledge going back years and years of the critical story and importance of equity and inclusion in education from beginning to end, from top to bottom. And that's something that's always been in the DNA of the campaign, but Estela brings it to the forefront. And so my homework assignment relates to a lot of what we've already heard. The best homework starts with what you heard in your presentation. It starts there. But I was a history major in my college experience, and I want to look back just a little bit. So in about 6 weeks, we will mark the 25th anniversary of the passing of Proposition 209 in California. A quarter century in this state without the undeniable benefits of affirmative action across the board, but most pointedly in higher education. And as we've heard suggested today, the ongoing impacts of that terribly wrong-headed proposition are significant, not just for the University of California and its flagship institutions, but increasingly for the impacted programs and campuses of the California State University as well. So looking back, we've heard all the wonderfully promising commitments and progress made by these leaders today. But looking back a quarter of a century, and as Estela pointed out, couldn't have imagined the leadership that we see today 25 years ago, when we're all so wonderfully fortunate that Estela Ben-Simon became a Californian. But looking back over a quarter of a century, we are going to have to, as a state, convey to the rest of the country what we have learned. Because regrettably, as a civil rights lawyer, I have to confess, just within this big, expanded room, that the composition of our current United States Supreme Court means that shortly, the rest of the country may face what we faced 25 years ago, which is a future public higher education without affirmative action. And the eyes of the country will turn to us in California, and they will ask us, what did you learn? How did you transition? What worked? What didn't? What are the best practices? And our answer, well, it will be composed of the promise and commitment we heard tonight, also has to be a deep and painful look back at what occurred over the last quarter century. So there's the homework assignment. When the country turns to us, what will we say in response? How will we guide the rest in that post-affirmative action era that we may regrettably face across the country? Now, those of you online, I don't know if you see the beautiful setting that we are in, but we have fire in the middle of water. Now, the campaign has a practice of picking settings that always remind me of the campaign itself. So I gotta say, fire on water, that's the campaign. These are leaders who start fires in water. I don't mean destructive climate-driven wildfires. I mean productive fires under the feet of governors, legislators, and yes, occasionally administrators of our systems. So I know that my homework assignment is going to be taken up with vigor by the Campaign for College Opportunity. But I invite all of us to work together to build on what we've heard from our esteemed system leaders to move forward for the next quarter century in setting an example for the rest of the country and the world. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We appreciate your ongoing partnership.